Through our journey and through the documentary of Mallory's Army, what I really wanted to do was continue this voice and continue to showcase other people's stories. Because I think that one of the biggest obstacles that we have is that people feel sorry for you for a few months. You know, they feel sorry, but then they expect you to move on, and what they don't understand is that you never move on. So I wanted to use my life to showcase other people's stories and the things that happen to them, but also what they're doing. They're taking on challenges that I didn't know needed to be taken on, and now that I'm living it, I go, oh, now I can get it. So I want to thank all of you for being here with me today. I thought this was so important. So today's episode is breaking down some of the misinformation around 504s and IEPs. I feel like that this episode is really going to give parents the meat and potatoes that they need to be able to come in, and what better people to talk to than lawyers that do this every day for their living. You live, breathe, eat, sleep this work, and I think that this is so important. Yeah. I want to let you guys introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there. So Beth, let's start with you.
Okay, my name's Beth Manes.
Denise Verzella.
Jessica Weinberg. Thank you for having us.
Oh, this is awesome. I'm going to start with my own story because I think that that's really so important so you can see the journey of what happened. You know, Mallory's grade started to slip in the spring. We started to see she went from having like a 90 in class to having a 60. And, you know, we were really kind of struggling. I wanted to check all the boxes to make sure that what Mallory was going through wasn't something that I should be working on. I mean, I had in my heart what I knew what was going on. And I do know that when grades typically slip for kids, that does mean something's going on. That's usually kind of a warning sign. So I knew that because all I really want to do is help you and protect you and to make sure that nobody in this room feels the way that Mallory did. So what happened, right? Contrary to what a lot of people think, particularly you guys, it wasn't one big thing that caused Mallory to hurt herself. It was lots and lots and lots of little things. As I spoke to my mom friends, particularly my moms that worked in special needs, they said maybe Mallory needs a 504 or an IEP. And I thought to myself, well, she's never had that before. She's never had issues. You know, she was in 6th grade. She was never diagnosed with any kind of learning or emotional, you know, instability before. You know, she never had issues. So I thought, well, why would she need that? I thought that a 504 and IEP was for children that were, you know, to use the broad term, on the spectrum. And then, of course, the solution was from the school for me to hire a tutor. I grew up in an era where if the school suggested that you do something, you followed the rules of the system. So that's what I did. I hired Mallory tutor. First and foremost, what is a 504 plan?
Okay, a 504 plan is a document that maps out for everybody what a child needs to receive his or her education and really just function throughout the day. I mean, it's to address anything that impairs a child's ability to substantially impact an activity of daily living, a major life activity. So whether it's, you know, ramp to get into the building, extra time to read questions on a test, maybe only putting one test question on a page because a child can't focus. And preferential seating is something you see a lot, and it's just so vague, so I'm just gonna harp on that for a minute. You know, preferential seating for a child who has difficulty hearing or difficulty focusing might mean sitting in the front of the room. For a child who has social anxiety, maybe preferential seating is sitting in the back of the room with nobody behind them. So it's supposed to be very individualized to your child to, you know, help them with the things they need help with.
Well, so when did it change? Because I know when I was growing up, it felt like that if a child needed to sit at the front of the room because they had ants in their pants, or they had a hearing problem, or they had, you know, couldn't see very well, or whatever those issues were, I would assume that if a child is in a wheelchair and needed ramp access into the building, that is almost in the vein of common courtesy. So when did it change? Because I don't remember it being like that.
Right, I mean, the law itself isn't new. I mean, 504 plan refers to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. I mean, it's been amended all along, and, you know, now you have building codes that require ramps into buildings, but, you know, maybe not into certain parts of buildings, so that's where the 504 plan would address something like a ramp. But, you know, I remember growing up, yep, absolutely, there were teachers who would be more forgiving or helpful or accommodating to a student who needed help, but I also had a teacher who, rather than figure out what it was I needed to focus, just sent me out into the hall because I talked too much. Right. So now there's people are more attuned to the fact that with a little bit of help and a little bit of accommodations and modifications, students can access their education without being sent into the hall or punished for their disabilities, really.
All right, so as a parent, let's say that I wanted to start the process. Jessica, how does a parent like myself know if they're eligible for a 504? Right? Mallory's in 6th grade and she's starting to have symptoms or starting to her grades plummet. Now, Mallory's probably not a great example because we know where that was coming from, but let's say that there's a parent who's starting to have issues and they're starting to question it. How does a parent know if their child is eligible for 504?
Well, typically, seeing your child struggle either academically, behaviorally, or even socially can be indicators that something is going on. The law really encourages that the first step that you take would be asking that your child be referred to the intervention and referral services. They call it INRS. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before. And those are scientifically based interventions that the school district is supposed to employ in the classroom with the assistance of a committee to see if those interventions work. Now, those interventions can be going on simultaneously with, let's say, a referral to the IEP team. It doesn't have to be IRNS or BUST, but that technically is what the law provides, that IRNS should be your first step. You would essentially put in writing, because everything needs to go in writing when you are working with the school district.
I love that because believe that, and I talk about that in my parent workshops all the time. Always, if you're going to call the teacher or reach out to the teacher, make sure that you CC another administrator in it, because what you don't want to hear is, well, I never got your email. You want to make sure that you're including multiple people in that scenario so that everybody's on the same page. Stop having emotional conversations with the school. Be very direct and always send something in writing. And if you have a conversation with the school, follow it up with an email as per our conversation on this date. And I say it so that there's no misinterpretation. You and I can have a conversation. Your interpretation of what the next steps and the actions are could be so different than what I walked away with. So I always think it's really important to put that in writing. So 100%. I love, exactly.
And it doesn't exist unless it's in writing.
Correct.
In the world of a school district.
Right.
We've created a communication log for our clients, and we encourage you just keep a running log of every time you speak to somebody, follow up with an email, and keep it together, because it's just easier to keep it all in one place. So later, when you're at an IEP meeting and you say, I've asked you 6 times about this. Well, was it really 6 times? Maybe it was 8, or maybe it was only 4. And that way you've got it in writing. I spoke to this person, I spoke to that person.
Right. And when she talks about getting it in writing, check with your school district, because some school districts will only take referrals by letter.
Not email.
Not email. Like email, they may not accept an email as asking for a referral to the child study team or the IEP team. So check with your school district. There should be a policy on their website and who to send it to, because if you send it to the wrong person, it may just get delayed. I
think we need a parent's bill of rights that really spells this out, because again, as a parent who didn't even know any of this language about how you even start the process, especially if you've been in the school system a longer time. I think you build up these habits of being in the school system. You kind of take for granted and you just kind of think that you know the process, and then all of a sudden when something does hit you out of the blue, where do you start and know how to do that? So knowing what the school's procedure. Now, is this something that if I wanted to start this, I would go to, say, a public meeting like the Board of Ed and request it? And the reason why you want to go to the Board of Education meeting is those minutes are recorded. So you want to document all of these things. You want to let them know that you've had a situation, whether it was resolved or whether it wasn't resolved. You want to create this paper trail of support that you've done.
Okay, so this is the tricky part. Deciding, should you ask for a meeting with the 504 team, or should you ask for a referral to the child study team? And the child study team is the team that oversees the IEP. So the way I would advise a client is, let's take a step back. What is it that you think is going on with your child? Let's say, for example, a child's grades are all A's, but they have complete social anxiety and they're not attending school on a regular basis. And they've already got a diagnosis, an anxiety disorder, by a psychiatrist.
And do you recommend that the schools provide those diagnoses, or do you recommend that parents go outside of their school system and get their own diagnosis?
I always prefer that parents get their own diagnosis.
That's how I feel about it.
It's
That's what
more objective, and
Right.
you can expedite the process that way. Perhaps this child really has no academic issues. Maybe that child only needs a late start because her anxiety peaks in the morning.
Right.
And she needs perhaps online instruction in the 2 classes that are the first 2 periods of the day. That will facilitate her return to school. That's a student that probably just needs a 504 plan because an accommodation would be a late start and home instruction. However, it is probably best to request a referral to the child study team. Then they will do testing. And that request should go in writing. You should, in that request, specify what it is that you're concerned about and why you think your child should be tested. Then the team has to conduct at least 2 evaluations. They would do a psychological and an educational just to be sure there's not a learning disability at play, even though the child's not struggling academically, because if there is an undiagnosed learning disability, it may be causing anxiety. You just don't know.
I love that you said that because I think sometimes children with straight A's can have learning disabilities.
100%.
Right?
They're very intelligent. They've been
Right.
compensating all these years, but they have so much anxiety because they're working that much harder than the average student because they have a learning disability. But a lot of school districts may resist testing a child like that because it needs to be having an impact on you educationally. So a lot of school districts will interpret that very narrowly and say, it's not having an impact because she's getting straight A's.
Right.
So we would argue it is having an impact, she can't come to school. There are a lot of different categories that can make you eligible for an IEP, one of which is emotionally disturbed or other health impaired.
As a mom, I'm, obviously comparing my journey, but there was a lot of emphasis from us as a family about Mallory's grades because I saw them changing. I saw her struggling emotionally from it, and I couldn't put my finger on it.
Right. It's just the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
But like,
Right.
what's it telling you?
Right.
Yeah.
I knew that there was something going on. It's like being blind with a flashlight this big. I knew something was going on. I knew I was in the dark about something. One day, Mallory called me and said, "Mom, I'm so excited. 5th grade. The girls have decided to let me be their friend." Good. This is all good stuff. She was so excited. The next day at school, they were going to wear jean overalls and a pink t-shirt. And all the girls were going to come together and wear this outfit. She was finally being included. So we had to run to the mall that night. We had to buy the pink t-shirt. She didn't sleep a wink that night. She could not wait to wear that pink t-shirt and those jean overalls to fit in with the girls that finally accepted her. What do you think happened the next day when Mallory showed up at school? Yes, sir.
They probably didn't wear the overalls and the pink shirt.
Wow. How do you know that? Does that happen sometimes here? You're right. Pretty insightful, right, grown-ups? I think it's pretty interesting that none of these children met Mallory, yet they knew exactly what happened to her. One of the things that we blur is this social and emotional learning is very important. It's not all about academics. It's not ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. What if there is an impairment, like an episode, like epilepsy or Crohn's disease?
Well, episodic impairments, epilepsy, even anxiety to a certain extent, those are able to be covered by a 504 plan. You are able to get accommodations for those. So if you have a child who's diabetic and needs to carry food, or if you have a child who has epilepsy and maybe needs to have a certain schedule or be able to go to the nurse when they need to if they're not feeling well, that's all stuff that can be covered under a 504 plan. And also schools can't take into account, except for glasses, what you're doing outside medically. So if a child who has epilepsy is on medication and it makes her steady, makes her not have her episodes very often, they can't then say, well, she doesn't need her 504 plan because she's taking medication. No, they're not allowed to take that into account.
That's so interesting. I never knew that. So if a child is on any kind of antidepressants and their mood has stabilized for that, because I guess what it would mean is we don't know what the triggers are. Right? You don't know what those triggers are, and just because the medication is working for, say, 90 days doesn't mean that there's not going to be another onset of trauma to cause an issue.
Right. ADHD is another common example. A lot of kids take medications to manage their ADHD, but it changes as a child gets older, as they get
As
bigger.
the day changes too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, days are off, and
Exactly. Obviously, we're talking to the logistics of and the laws in New Jersey, right? So who decides if a child gets a 504?
And even within the laws of New Jersey, like, it's going to vary from district to district. Every district has to have a 504 coordinator. It's often the principal or the vice principal. So that's your contact person. Unlike at the IEP process, and we'll go through that in a minute, it's less structured as to who has to be around the table. Does anybody even have to be around the table? So it's usually the 504 coordinator, any teacher who's really experiencing the child's difficulties, if there are experts involved who have maybe evaluated a child, the parents should be in the room. I think as the kids get older, the kids should be in the room because the kid knows what the kid's experiencing. The kid is the one who's going to say, I need to sit in the back of the room, or I can't function when this happens.
It's the only requirement is that someone's knowledgeable
Right.
about the child's needs. That's
Which is
it.
really vague.
That is. And now, do they have to go through specific training, or is this just you go into a school?
It's your turn to be the 504 coordinator.
Really?
Yeah.
So what happens if the principal or the vice principal, whoever it is, just doesn't feel that they want to accommodate that or don't want to do? But if you're not really savvy in this and you understand the laws, then you're having a conversation with someone who's maybe not as trained in this as they should. Do they have the right to deny that and say, we're not going to honor that? Okay.
They do. We've often counseled clients and helped them write letters, and usually just take it up the chain and go, as far as the director of special services.
Okay.
Who will then hopefully look at everything and think, okay, this child really does need some accommodations and modifications, or gee, let's give them modifications and accommodations so we don't have to give them an IEP.
And sometimes it's just a matter of the parents don't have the right documentation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They don't have documentation supporting that they have a physical or mental impairment that is substantially impacting a major life activity. So we will help guide them to get the appropriate diagnoses, and then that will usually do the trick. And if it doesn't, and they've already tried to go up chain of command by going to the director of special services, maybe then meeting with the superintendent, the next step would be obviously a lawyer would get involved and reach out to the attorney for the school district first. If that's unsuccessful, then we can file what's called a petition for mediation or due process, and that's with the New Jersey Department of Education. Or we could file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights.
Wow.
So
Now,
there's kind of two avenues there.
in your practice, is this 50% of the time you have to take it to the legal step? Do you find that most schools are accommodating to this?
It often depends on the district. When clients come to us, we work very hard to, we say we don't want to come out from behind the curtain until it's really necessary. Because your relationship with your school district, it's potentially, a 15-year marriage from which you cannot get divorced unless you move.
And what you don't want it to do is to escalate to a situation where the school doesn't want to take your phone calls. Because remember, your son does need education, and kids do make mistakes, and kids will be kids. But this is not ultimately how we win. There are street fights, like pitchforking the school and demanding and using terminology that puts them in a defensive mechanism. And that's not really what we want to do, because at the end of the day, while you want to be the squeaky wheel that gets the oil, you also want to come across as a rational human being that can have an adult conversation about the laws, because the minute that you become hostile and the minute you start throwing around terminology that has even an ounce of legal threats to it, the school will shut down. Right.
So we don't want to come in and storm the ramparts and burn down the building when your kid's in kindergarten.
Right.
You have a long history coming up with this, a long future really. So we try to just guide the clients and the parents to work with the district amicably, and sometimes we'll ghostwrite an email or a letter and just help them. Here's the documentation we think you need to get where you need to be. And sometimes by the time we get involved and we come out from behind the curtain, sometimes the lawyer from the district will say to us, I just need you to file for due process and then we can settle this.
Okay,
because
perfect.
And sometimes they're willing to give like certain accommodations just to kind of shut you up. Like they'll be like, oh, we'll give them preferential seating and we'll let them go visit the nurse, but we don't want to give them extra time on their exams because then we have to hire somebody to sit with them. We don't want to put the ramp in, we'll just make sure their classes are on a certain floor. So they might like throw you a bone, but that might not be what you actually need or your child actually needs to be successful.
Which is where I would think that the classification, the medical diagnosis would come into play, where you can really determine what is an acceptable negotiations and what's not.
But that's why we always counsel our clients, the more information they can get together before they approach the school district, the better. Because we can anticipate all of the objections that are coming up.
Right.
So we want to get them out of the way before they go in.
Exactly. Well, that's a great transition. Let's talk a little bit about some of the examples of modifications and accommodations that a child can get. And again, I know that this is so broad, but let's talk about, I think, modifications for children with anxiety, maybe depression, maybe ADHD, because I think that that's the category to me that kind of gets skipped over. I think if your child is in a wheelchair or has, physical, that's something that you can't. But I find that the mental aspects of what we're talking about, that is such a gray area. So what are some examples of a child that has maybe some anxiety, maybe some school refusal going on? Because I've seen that a lot. I get an email a week.
Yes.
My child refuses to go to school. The parents know that something's going on. They know that something has shifted. Give us some examples of some modifications and accommodations that a child with maybe anxiety could get.
Sure. Well, like Jessica had said before, a late start for a student who has a hard time getting up and getting to school in the morning because anxiety or depression makes it more difficult for him or her to come to school. Online education where appropriate, changing schedules. If they have a difficult time with like a math or a reading class that's hard for them first thing in the morning, but it's better after lunch, scheduling that child's day so that they can take advantage of when they're at their peak. Exams that are only printed one question on a page, so a child who has a visual issue only has to focus on that one question. Exams being read to them if a child has a reading comprehension issue but is better at listening, that may be a way to modify that. Counseling services can be part of a 504 plan.
Really?
A guidance counselor or a school psychologist, a social skills group for a child who has poor social skills. Those all can be part of a 504 plan, although a lot of districts don't like to put them in. They can be part of a 504
Let
plan.
me ask you this, just something that popped into my head is, let's say that a school system is saying your child doesn't want to come to school in the mornings because they're up all night long, they're on their phone, they don't really have an anxiety, they're not wanting to come to school in the morning because they're sleepy. Do schools have the ability to do that? Can they respectfully disagree with your diagnosis and, choose to?
They often disagree, respectfully and disrespectfully disagree with your diagnosis.
Well, listen, I'm being nice.
Oh, sorry.
I know, yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
get that memo.
But I think that that's important because I could
Right.
see a school very easily saying your kid makes straight A's. They're not wanting to come to school in the morning just because they've got, junior or senioritis, or maybe they're a sophomore and it's not really anxiety related. It's just that they're teenagers, they're lazy and they're tired.
Right, and then taking that a step further, the parents have run the gamut. Look, there's no screen time. We take the phone away, whatever. But what we've also seen is districts saying, you can't control your kid. They file truancy charges against the parents. They call DCP&P on the parents.
Is truancy still a thing? I didn't even know it existed anymore.
Oh, yes. And districts will often use it as a sword to get a parent to conform to whatever they want. You can't get your kid in, fine, we'll file truancy charges, and you talk to the judge about it.
It's
Okay.
heartbreaking because
It
these
is.
kids are suffering while the parents and the districts are fighting. I mean, what parent doesn't want their kid to go to school? I wouldn't be coming to you for help if I didn't care if my kid went to school or not. Right.
You touched upon something before where you said your child's getting good grades. So for a 504, a lot of school districts are under the misbelief that it has to impact your learning, and they view that as like the only major life activity.
Right.
But school attendance is a major life activity.
Right.
So that still should warrant an accommodation plan through a 504.
Can I jump in with a couple
Yeah.
other accommodations that are just running through my head?
Yeah.
Just for the angst-ridden kids. Sometimes not making a kid do an oral presentation, different types of group projects, or choosing who they're in a group with, and also just a nurse's pass. Like we've had kids who they get a nurse's pass, they may never use it, but they know that if they need a break, they can cut out and go to the nurse's
Funny
office.
that you bring up about doing projects with. Two of the girls that were involved in the bullying of Mallory, They didn't surface until towards the end of the school year. I didn't find out until right towards the very end. Do you know that Mallory did math with these girls? Those were her group math partners. And Mallory would have never said, I don't want to do the math with these girls, because this goes into the vein of like relational bullying, things like that, but you're wanting to fit in with your bully. So you would never necessarily speak outside of that. But Mallory was, put into a group with two of the girls. And I thought, what a horrible journey that must have been like, knowing that they're making fun of me, but I'm forced to sit with them at math. But I find it interesting that a child can do well in school, be put in a situation where that they're uncomfortable, but that experience definitely affected the other classes. And so, of course, I don't know any of this until after everything happened, until right towards the very end. I want you guys to be kids. I want you to have a good time. I want you to enjoy life. But I want you to be respectful. And I want you to learn that your words matter. I want you to promise me today that you're going to wear the Mallory's Army band, not because you feel sorry because Mallory died. I'm not here for you to feel sorry for me. I'm here for you to make a difference in your life. I want you to be a better person. I want you to be a better person. I want you to be a better person. And I just really appreciate you volunteering your time today to be with us. And we'll just continue to push in the right direction to make sure that every child, no matter what the circumstances are, that they have a healthy and safe learning environment that is free from hate, free from exclusion, free from intimidation, and free from bullying.